Today we're diving into the incredible story of an operating system that has not only survived but has really defined modern computing for a quarter of a century. We're talking, of course, about Apple's macOS. From the very brink of collapse to the peak of innovation, this is a story all about reinvention.
So, you gotta ask yourself, what's the secret sauce? I mean, in the tech world where everything moves at the speed of light, how does an OS stay relevant for that long? It is such a rare feat, and let me tell you, the answer is a lot more than just good code.
For Apple, the journey was, well, it was seriously dramatic. It all kicked off with a moment of total corporate desperation. It hinged on the return of its iconic founder, and it was powered by a series of incredibly bold, strategic reinventions that we're about to walk through. All right, so our story begins in the mid-1990s, and this was a time when Apple was in deep, deep trouble. Its classic macOS was getting old, and the company just kept failing to build a replacement.
The 90s basically became a graveyard for Apple's big OS projects. You had these code names like Taligent, Copland, and Gershwin. They represented years of hard work and millions of dollars, and they all went absolutely nowhere. By 1997, the company was on the ropes, and it had to look outside its own walls for some kind of miracle.
And that miracle? It had a name. NeXTSTEP. This was the powerhouse OS built at Next, the company Steve Jobs started after he was forced out of Apple. Its foundation, built on a mock kernel and BSD Unix, was powerful, it was stable, and it was just years ahead of its time. So by buying Next, Apple didn't just get a new operating system, it got its future. And, crucially, it got Steve Jobs back.
And this brings us to Act 2, the X revolution. Now, that X wasn't just a letter. It was the Roman numeral for 10. This was meant to signal a complete and total break from macOS 9 and everything that came before it. This was a brand new beginning. So, when macOS X 10.0, codenamed Cheetah, launched back in March 2001, the reception was, well, let's just say it was mixed. Critics were pretty brutal, calling it dog-slow and feature-poor. It was this beautiful foundation, for sure, but the house wasn't quite finished yet. The performance just wasn't there.
But oh man, that foundation was absolutely stunning. The thing responsible for both the beauty and the slowness was this new interface called Aqua. With its water droplet buttons and see-through effects, it looked like nothing else out there. It was so vibrant that people literally called it lickable, and it basically set the design standard for the entire industry for the next decade.
After that slow start, Apple moved at lightning speed. This was the famous Big Cat era. Every single release, Puma, Jaguar, Panther, rapidly added new features and, most importantly, performance boosts. By the time we got to Tiger and Leopard, macOS X had gone from this slow but pretty experiment into a stable, fast, and feature-rich powerhouse.
Okay, this brings us to the next chapter, and it's defined by something that's really at the core of Apple's DNA, a willingness to make huge, platform-shaking bets. To keep the Mac thriving, Apple realized it had to change its very heart, not once, but twice.
The first big shift, announced in 2005, was the move from PowerPC to Intel. The PowerPC chips that had powered Macs for a decade were just running out of steam. They were getting way too hot, and they couldn't keep up with performance demands. Intel, on the other hand, offered a clear path to faster, cooler, and more power-efficient machines. It was a massive gamble.
So how did Apple pull this off without completely alienating its entire user base? The answer was a piece of software brilliance called Rosetta. This thing was a dynamic translator that let all your old PowerPC apps run on the new Intel Macs, and it did it almost flawlessly. For most people, the whole transition just felt seamless, like magic.
And then, in 2020, they did it all over again. After nearly 15 years with Intel, Apple announced an even bigger, more ambitious transition to its own custom chips, Apple Silicon. This move gave Apple complete control over its hardware and software, unlocking a whole new level of performance and efficiency. But maybe even more importantly, it started to blur the lines between the Mac and iOS.
And that brings us right up to the modern era. Now that Apple has mastered its own hardware, the OS itself has continued to evolve to fit its new central role in Apple's growing ecosystem of devices.
You know, the name itself tells a whole story. It started as macOS X to really emphasize those Unix roots. Then, in 2012, it got simplified to just OS X. And then, in 2016, it became macOS, which was a really strategic change to line it up with its younger siblings, iOS, watchOS,
and tvOS. The Mac was officially now a citizen in a much larger family.
The code names changed, too. After they ran out of big cats, Apple switched over to iconic California landmarks, starting with Mavericks. But you gotta pay attention to the version numbers here. After nearly 20 years of being version 10-point-something, Big Sur made the huge leap to version 11. And now, the upcoming Tahoe is set to jump all the way to 26, which aligns all of Apple's operating systems under a brand new yearly numbering system.
So where does all of this leave macOS today? Well, look, Windows still dominates the market, no question. But macOS holds a really strong and stable position as the world's second most used desktop OS. That's a huge testament to its enduring appeal and the success of the Mac platform as a whole.
So, when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway from this incredible 25-year journey? What is the real, enduring legacy of macOS?
It's a story that starts as a rescue mission for a company that was literally dying and becomes the story of an industry icon. Through these bold design choices, 2 incredibly high-stakes processor transitions, and just a constant willingness to change, macOS hasn't just survived, it has consistently pushed the entire industry forward.
And this brings us to the final and maybe the most exciting question. With massive shifts like AI and new design languages like liquid glass right on the horizon, this process of reinvention is clearly not over. It just leaves you to wonder, what will the Mac experience even be in another quarter century?